What's up, gamers? It's your boy, JKon. Welcome to another video. With Masters Madrid all wrapped up and Split 1 up getting underway, I thought it'd be fun to take a look at all the roster changes that have happened since kickoff began, as a lot of teams have retooled coming into the regular season. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're not, welcome back. Sorry that I've been MIA for a little bit. I have been dealing with some health issues as well as being extremely addicted to TFT. I've pumped in about like 100-something games in the last week. It is not good, so I'm trying to step away a little bit and focus back on making videos. So thank you all for all of your support. It's always very much appreciated. I did get co-streaming rights for the regular season for Americas and for China, so hopefully I'll be able to co-stream those events live on my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/JKonTV. But without further delay, let's get into it. All right, of course, we have to talk about the big signing here. Of course, my boy, Jing has returned to the active roster for Paper Rex. Now, I think this is absolutely insane and something that I kind of was not really fully expecting to happen all of a sudden, to be honest. Back in the day when it first announced that Jing was stepping down during Champions and that was going to be his final event, it was kind of a nice Cinderella story to kind of tie up his career for the temporary moment. Unfortunately, they were not able to take the crown as they did fall to EG in the grand finals, and we would not really see Jing much since then. Jing did participate with the team during AVL as he was kind of practicing a little bit, kind of like a last hurrah, and a lot of us, myself included, were kind of questioning like, how come they were playing with Jing so much when they had to integrate Monyet? Obviously, we know that Jing will not be able to play in the regular season if he is stepping down for his military service, so why not spend that time and reps to get Monyet integrated into the team? And well, I guess that answer is kind of solved because there was a little bit of a hint of it at the beginning of the season before kickoff began, where Jing was registered as a reserve player for Paper X, and now he's on the active roster. Unfortunately though, and I think this is kind of the big point here, which I feel quite sad about, is Monyet is now on the bench. He's on the reserve roster and he will not be playing going forward, and that kind of really sucks. You know, I really enjoyed Monyet. I thought he was really fun to watch. I thought he was really coming into his own. The beginning of kickoff, he got a lot of hate, and even during kickoff itself and going into Madrid, he was getting a ton of hate, but he really leveled up, found his confidence, and was able to put together a really good performance and really carried Paper X over the line sometimes. And honestly, it's commendable for him, and he had such big shoes to step into, and I thought he did a pretty decent job. And it just kind of sucks that he no longer will be able to stick with this roster, especially as I thought that he was starting to really gel with them. You know, I watched some of their content out there, and you know, chunky bros for life. So it's kind of sad to see that he won't be a part of this main roster anymore, but I mean, when the goat of Raze is called back into action, baby, I mean, how can you say no? So the reason why Jing is able to return to the active roster is that he was found medically unfit for the Singaporean army, and thus he no longer has to serve, and he is able to compete. So the medical thing that he is handling does not affect his ability to compete, but it causes an inability to be part of the military. So that's how that shook out. Now, how will this work out for Paper Rex? Well, there's a few things that are going to be kind of interesting with this. Is how will they, I guess, reintegrate him and kind of change up their comps? I think with Monyet, they kind of were able to have a little bit more flexibility with their players and agents, and kind of, will they go back to just Jing being a main Raze player all the time? I know Jing is able to play multiple duelists. He's also able to play Sage. I think their Sunset comp where Devi was playing Sage there, I think Jing can easily take over that spot, so the comp won't really be affected. Also, we know that something has been transitioning to Gecko and playing Initiator for them as well, so there's still a ton of flexibility for this team, so I'm not really too worried about them. I don't think they'll necessarily kick off immediately from the beginning. Like, I don't think they'll like just jump out and be the top dogs immediately, but I think there will be a ramping period. But man, boy, am I happy to have him back. Happy to have him back. Hell yeah. All right, sticking within the region, let's talk about Bleed Esports. They have dropped Crazy Guy, their IGL, who has been with them for quite a long time, who was the main part of the roster to carry them through Ascension. And they also dropped Egoist, who was one of their latest signings coming into 2024. And in their place, they have signed Zest, who was formerly of DRX, and Retla, who of course has been part of Bleed, and I've gone over him being part of Bleed many times. Bleed definitely have a habit of adding and subtracting the same players, plus Retla, minus Retla, plus Retla, minus Retla, plus JH, minus JH, plus JH, minus JH. So anyways, let's talk about these kinds of replacements here. Well, Crazy Guy was their IGL, so the IGL role will be handed over to Scary. And to me, I think I'm really quite sad about these roster changes. I was really hyped on Egoist coming into the new year. That was one of the things I really talked about. Talked about Yay, but Egoist was really my like big signing. But unfortunately, because their roles didn't work out and just like communication and the team vibe was just not good, Egoist unfortunately got cut and he has decided to retire and focus on his studies instead, which is understandable, but it's a damn shame because he's an absolute talent and I thought he was very good at the game, so it's very sad for me to see him go. But my boy Zest is back. Okay, so I've loved Zest. I think Zest has been such an integral part of DRX, and I'm actually really quite sad that they cut him. I thought Zest should not have been on the cutting block, as I thought his Viper play was incredible when he came back to the main roster for Champions last year, and whenever they wanted to sub out Foxy9 from the regular season. So I just thought that Zest was just so good and so important, and I think he'll really elevate this team a lot. But my only question is, how good is his English and how will he calm and communicate in English? We don't really know. Also, I don't know necessarily if Retla will be a top talent for tier 1, if that makes sense. There's a reason why he's been in and out of the bleed roster over time and was not part of the roster that made Ascension. So I just have a lot of question marks about this team, and the IGL transferring over to Scary, that's a really big thing for me because I'm not sure if that will impact his ability as a player itself, because most of the time we see players who take on the IGL reigns, they tend to perform worse because of it. So yeah, Bleed just has a lot of question marks and I'm kind of iffy about them, so I guess we'll see. Let's go over the Pacific Ocean and to the Americas region, my home region, and let's talk about Cloud9, as Cloud9 have dropped Whippy and they have dropped Jake, and in turn have signed Runi and Moose. Now if I got a nickel for every time that Cloud9 would drop 2 members and pick up their former IGL, I'd have 2 nickels. Kind of crazy that it happened twice, but here we are living in this timeline. Jake, I thought, did really well last year and actually performed pretty well. He was kind of on an upward trajectory within the controller role, and I thought he was honestly improving quite quickly. Runi himself actually had decent looks, and I thought he was a pretty solid player, but obviously they kind of lost faith in his calling near the end of the year. So it's understandable that Runi kind of got dropped back then, but he's coming back in this year, and in my opinion, I think it's not a bad idea. Runi was a pretty solid initiator player. I think having Vanity on initiator coming into this year was kind of iffy. I know he's played initiator in the past for Cloud9 and Shopify, but I just know that his home is on the controller role. Also, with the release of Clove, I wonder if they're going to do anything interesting with that. I could totally see Vanity running around with a judge, especially on bind with her, so it's going to be interesting. Whippy, on the other hand, I didn't think necessarily was the biggest problem. Yeah, he had his misses sometimes, but I would say he's more of on the inconsistent side. One thing that I would have to say just to consider, doesn't necessarily play 100% effect, is that because Whippy is a Russian resident, he did struggle with visa issues with the team in the off season. That's why he was unable to join them in their around the world tour, and in the AVL they were playing with Curry. So I can kind of see why they would drop him, as he was kind of inconsistent and not really performing that well. Moose, on the other hand, is a tier 2 staple. He's been around for a long time. He's been in Counter-Strike for a long time. The Moose is loose, as they say, and I honestly think Moose is a very good player. He has played with Vanity in the past, I believe, on Shopify, but overall I just think he's pretty solid. I think he's a good player. He's a good Sentinel player, and I mean, I wouldn't say it's necessarily like a pure upgrade. It might be like a side grade at best, but overall, like C9, I kind of just don't really know too much about their moves, and I think it really just depends on how well they gel. Another thing to consider about this team is that I think they need to rein in Oxy a little bit. Not to say that his craziness isn't good or isn't warranted, but it can lead to overheating at times, and although Vanity likes to call a very loose structure, I think having Runi as a secondary IGL to maybe contribute ideas can help. Also, Moose is very experienced as well, so having another more experienced voice in the team might help. But speaking of Curry, Sentinels have now added him onto their roster as their 6th man. Sentinels have fortunately allowed Pancata to look for offers without a buyout. Now, this is something that I kind of called after Sentinels won AVL in the offseason, because I said that there's no way that you can change the starting 5, as they are just too good together, and their chemistry and their comms are just way too good, and the vibes are just too good with Zelsis. And they went on to, of course, win Kickoff and Masters Madrid. So I don't want to say my hopium for Sentinels was warranted and right, but you know, my Sentinels for hope was kind of right. Just putting that out there. Anyways, so that just left Pancata on the bench, unfortunately for him. So he was able to explore options, which I think is a lovely thing for them. Sentinels are not holding him in contract jail, which is nice. And Pancata did talk about this a little bit, how he said he had an offer from FURIA, but unfortunately the timing didn't line up as he was in Brazil and he was dealing with health issues. I believe some people were saying that he might have had dengue, which is a very deadly disease if not treated properly, and it takes a lot of time to get better. So I just hope that Pancata is able to get the rest that he needs, and hopefully we'll see him in tier 1 soon. But going back to Curry, who has replaced him, I think Curry's a pretty solid bet, a very talented player who is able to flex to pretty much every role. We have seen him fill in for the Sentinel role already, playing for Cloud9 at the AVL, where they were able to take multiple series wins and push Fnatic to 5 maps. So I would say it's not a bad idea to have someone who's local in Americas, not in Brazil, be their 6th man, especially someone who can just jump in when they need it. So overall, solid. Now speaking of FURIA, the team that offered Pancata a job, they have instead went with Nauzer as a replacement for Liazi. Now FURIA actually kind of was a little bit of a disappointment in my opinion. I thought they would come out a little bit better with a better showing, but they didn't look overall that great. Unfortunately for them, they kind of got Bumbo cladded. So the replacement that they brought in is Nauzer, a former FURIA member, and I think this is a great signing for him. I think it was super depressing for Nauzer to get dropped from Leviathan around Christmas time, especially after they dominated Superdome with him and looked really good. But instead they went with signing Calm, and Nauzer was sitting on the bench until now. And I think this is a wonderful place for Nauzer to return. He's familiar with the organization and he gets to IGL, and I don't think this will necessarily affect the roles too much. I think Nauzer will probably be the main initiator player. They'll probably switch Khalil to main controller and then Conan to Sentinel. I don't think this will really affect too much of them because Conan and Khalil are both used to playing those roles, and having a little bit more experience might really bolster this team. FURIA did kind of want to have the loud approach from last year, bringing in 2 rookies and kind of groom them up a little bit into more talented players, but unfortunately Yazi was not able to make the cut, and FURIA have welcomed home a former member. And last but not least, in the Americas, we have a Crew, and they have made a, I guess, an IGL change and a signing. So unfortunately for Crew, they had to make an emergency stand-in signing with Heat as MTA broke his wrist and was unable to compete, so he is currently sitting as their substitute. Heat, of course, was part of MIBR last year as part of their inaugural roster before he was dropped and replaced by Chosen because of just issues within the team. So how do I feel about this? I'm not the biggest fan of this signing. I don't know if Heat will be taking over the duelist role or if he'll be playing the flex role that MTA played. I thought MTA actually looked quite impressive on the flex role, and Kesnet, of course, just absolute beast on the duelist, so he should stay. So if Heat is taking over the flex role, it'll be interesting to see how he plays in that. If he takes the duelist role from Kesnet and forces Kesnet to flex, I'm not going to be a happy camper. Now, talking about their IGL switch from Melzer to Klaus, these two have been flip-flopping on their IGLing back and forth. Now, the only problem that I have with this is that Klaus' performance in game severely suffered whenever he was IGLing. Yes, they were able to make multiple champions, actually every single champion iteration, which is quite impressive, but if you really think about it, they kind of had to go through South America qualifiers, which didn't have the biggest competition in the early years. But besides the point, I still am kind of iffy on Klaus's calling overall. I think Melzer wants to focus on performance, but that was the same reason that Klaus claimed beforehand as to why Melzer took the IGL role. So it'll be interesting to see how this switch goes back. I don't think this is necessarily a needle mover, and I might be more worried about Crew than I was previously. Let's head over to China though, and let's talk about some of these teams, because oh boy, has China made some moves. So Tyloo has traded Luo King and their coach Yi to Trace Esports for Flexin. Now, how do I feel about this move? I'll talk about the Tyloo side first. So Luo King was Tyloo's controller player, and Tyloo didn't look that great in kickoff. Yeah, I don't know. The teams have just some fascination with Phoenix. I don't know. There's something iffy about it to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a Phoenix hater, but I did not think that Tyloo looked very good. I think they were kind of not using HFMI as like a superstar player, which I think they really should. And overall, their plans and their game structure was kind of meh in my opinion. So it's kind of interesting to see that they are switching him out for Flexin. Now, to talk about Flexin on the other hand, I thought Flexin coming into 2024 was one of the weaker parts of Trace Esports. I've actually been a very big fan of theirs ever since I watched them throughout the Evolution series. And I thought Flexin was kind of their weaker player, but coming into the new year, my man man was absolutely frying. I believe he's the top rated player in China, or at least in the controller role, and was looking absolutely like a beast. And he's been a part of that Trace core for multiple years. So it's kind of interesting to me that Trace were willing to drop him, a very top performing player that's been a part of their core. And this all could just come from Tyloo offering Trace the bag. Tyloo has a ton of money, and Trace is a definitely smaller organization. So maybe Tyloo offered the bag for flexing, and since they wanted a better controller player, they were in turn going to drop Walking. So it kind of makes sense in those kinds of aspects, but overall I think it kind of makes both teams a little bit weaker, but I guess we'll just kind of have to wait and see. Now, Titans Esports Club, or RB's team, has added another 2-letter name member, and that is AC, who previously played for Shenzhen Enter and was a controller player but has flexed around to other roles. I don't know if this guy will be playing. I don't know too much about him, I'll be honest. And Titan just have a ton of people on their roster. People want to talk about wolves in their 8-man roster. Titan now have 3, 6, 8. Now also have an 8-man roster. They already had 2 players on the bench with Shameless and Black. So now I guess we'll have to see who gets put on the bench as well. I don't know again if this is a needle mover, but this team was definitely very fun to watch. I think the RB Raze was definitely interesting to see, which we haven't seen him play duelists in quite a while outside of the Neon, but like a pure duelist in Raze, it's been a long time. So it was really fun to see him fry on that agent for sure. Going over to Nova, what everybody, myself included, would be considered China's weakest team coming into 2024. And honestly, they blew my expectations out of the water. They kept the same core that they had from 2023, adding a few players here and there, but I didn't expect them to be very good or put much of a competition, but they actually look pretty solid. One of the standout players I have to talk about is their, well, technically it was their Sentinel player, Guang. He was their Sentinel player, and their duelist player was Ponghe, but Ponghe was not performing well on the duelist, so they swapped, and Guang was just absolutely popping off. I believe he got one of, if not the first ace of the Chinese league, which was pretty nuts, and Ponghe looked okay on the Sentinel role, but it looks like Nova are looking to upgrade in the duelist role, signing SWERL, who was part of RNG in the past. Now, Nova used to have an import player named Never, who was a Russian duelist player, I believe, but he was never really part of the roster outside of being signed, and he never played, but he has been dropped, and his place SWERL will be taking it as the import player. Yeah, I really don't know too much about SWERL. Maybe he will elevate this team. I guess they're kind of replacing their weakest link and allowing Guang to go back to Sentinel, which will be kind of cool. So I don't know, maybe this team will kind of just be a dark horse for exciting games. I think they might be fun to watch. They got some banger ass names though, you know. They got Obi-Wan. I thought it was O-Bone at first, but apparently it's Obi-Wan. So, you know, we got a Star Wars fan up in here. Shout out to them. Let's go to JDG. Now, JDG have signed the former ASE in-game leader, Yu Chen, or what I want to talk about, the last member of ASE to get picked up. So, Attacking Soul Esports, of course, a team that we are very familiar with, went to an international event last year, and were not able to make it to franchising or through the Ascension tournament. So, their entire team got picked apart, with members going everywhere. Now, Yu Chen is the last member to get picked up, and I don't think it's a bad move. So what happened with JDG was that they initially signed JKon, expecting to sign a full roster coming into 2024, as they were pretty much guaranteed a slot in the franchise league. Now, most teams were expecting Rare Atom to win Ascension, but instead Dragon Rider Gaming did, and that left the Rare Atom roster up for sale, which of course JDG swooped in and scooped up for the members, leaving out the second Korean that they had on the roster, their IGL Yeoman. Now they handed the reins of IGL to JKon to lead this 4 core from Rare Atom, but unfortunately they didn't really look that good or that coordinated. Of course, Stu and Viva put up insane numbers and were fragging like madmen, but they just fell short in qualifying for Masters Madrid. So I think benching JKon and bringing in an actual IGL with a lot of experience, who has led a team in the past or international event, is a really good sign, and I think it's a good move for them. I expect JDG to continue to keep firing. I hope that Yu Chen can really work well with them, and I don't know how good his English is, but he might have to communicate in English a little bit with Stu, but overall not too bad. And again, like I said way back in the day, they still got the coach Val Analysis, the GOAT himself. So How can you say no? And last but not least, for the Chinese region, we have Bilibili Gaming signing Bale as their head coach. Now, this one is pretty interesting to me. Not to say that Bilibili were lacking coaching, but Bilibili definitely had a troublesome coaching history. Jackson, who is now another coach on them, most likely the assistant coach, has been with the team on and off for quite a while. He was the head coach, then demoted, then was off the roster, then was assistant coach, then head coach, blah, 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 blah. He's had a long history with the team, but BOG didn't really come out firing on all cylinders coming into the new year. And they did look kind of iffy a little bit. YZ still extremely good. They did replace their weakest link of Rin with Bear, but Bear is handling the new IGL role and a new controller role. So I think bringing in a very experienced coach, who of course was part of Gen G last year and has been part of multiple teams in the past, will just honestly help them out. Bilibili, I think, has a lot of potential, and they honestly showed it last year, but they did regress from their form last year. So I'm hoping with a new head coach that he can bring in a new dynamic and kind of give them a little bit of that Korean flavor a little bit. Yeah. And last but not least, the final move that I want to talk about today is GIANTX in EMEA. So GIANTX have parted ways with Nukkye and in his place have signed Purpo. Now this one I'm pretty sad about. Nukkye has been my boy for a very long time. He came from, of course, TF2 and Counter-Strike, and you know I'm a TF2 and Counter-Strike player, so anyone who comes from those roots are, you know, soft spot in my heart. But it's really sad to see, because I thought that Nukkye was always Giant's second best player, if not the best player at times throughout. He's been able to play multiple roles, and although he did kind of have a bit of a drop off playing Sentinel this year, I still think he had a lot to prove and a lot to show, and it just kind of sad to see him get kind of yeeted. One of the things I do have to say is that Nukkye has been known to be a more of a vocal player. He has shown this in the past with G2 and Heretics, so I wonder if he had continuing arguments with maybe Redgar and how to lead the team, kind of similar to how Safe had issues last year in Liquid. So I don't really know, but in his place they have signed Purpo. Now Purpo is an absolute talent. He has been known in the scene for quite a long time. He was on Mech's team as like their sixth man back in 2021. Wow, that's a really long time ago. So he has played with Redgar before, and I believe he was part of Ascend at one point as well. Anyways, he's just been tearing it up. He's a main duelist player. He's played other roles as well, playing Flex, and I believe he'll just be coming into this role being their new main duelist player. Now, what does this mean? It means they're most likely pushing Fatino to Flex and Hoodie most likely to Sentinel, which I find kind of interesting and confusing at the same time, because one, I think Hoodie has very great utility from Flash Initiators from that Flex role. He also plays Viper quite well. So moving Fatino to that and then making Hoodie learn a new role is kind of interesting to me. Also, I thought in order to bring in a new duelist that you would drop Fatino anyways, but as the only sole Spanish representation for the Spanish organization, I kind of understand that they want to keep their branding alive, especially as there are not too many Spanish players left with Mixwell's retirement. So I kind of get it, but I really don't, and this just leaves me with more question marks for GIANTX, and I kind of feel for my boy Cloud, as he was already 1v9ing, and I kind of fear that it might just be even more of a 1v9. So yeah. And I guess there is one more roster move that I kind of forgot. G2 will be playing with Icy instead of Net, benching the longtime Sentinel player who has been with the core for the past, goodness, 3 years now? Yeah, 3 years now. It's been 3 years. I don't mind this change at all. I think that the guard, although known for their core of sticking together and really being that 4 core, I think if there was a player that was removable from that, it was Net. Not to say that Net is a bad player at all. I think he's very talented and he is very skilled at what he does, but I think one of the issues, and the guard has highlighted this over and over again in interviews and vlogs and whatnot, is communication. And I think they have just too many voices and too many cooks in the kitchen. Valorant was already a very vocal and strong leader. Net could be an IGL himself with how vocal he is, and having 2 very strong voices already and then adding a third with Leaf, I don't think necessarily helps out people. There's just too many voices going on, too much overcomms, and we kind of saw that. Even Jonah P back in the day gave an acknowledgement for telling Valorant to shut up in a play because they were just overcomming. But that's just something that has to be considered in a game where communication is so important. Now, as for Icy, I don't really know too much about him. He's a tier 2 player that was part of EG's reserve roster all of last year. So obviously he has a lot of reps against a very talented team in a very good system structured environment. So I think his addition into this roster can be good for them. It might breathe new life into the roster, but I guess we'll have to wait and find out and see if this new G2 look will be something to look out for. And there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Those are all of the roster moves that have happened since kickoff began. Let me know down below in the comments what you think about them. Are there any of these roster moves that you think will really elevate a team? Do you think some of these moves are bad for them? I really want to know what your opinions are, as I love to hear what you guys have to say. Am I underrating some of these moves? Am I overrating some of these moves? I genuinely don't know, as some of these players I don't know 100% about. But hey, you do what you do. Anyways, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And until next time, stay hydrated. Peace.